The morning we buried my wife, her office manager called me from the parking lot of the funeral home. I was standing just inside the vestibule, still holding the small laminated program the funeral director had handed me, Ruth's photo on the front, the one from our anniversary trip to the Smokies 11 years ago, her hair catching the wind, laughing at something I'd said that I can't even remember now. My son and his wife were somewhere behind me. I could hear her heels on the tile. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go. But something, 32 years as a county sheriff will do things to your instincts that retirement can't undo. Something made me answer. Mr. Hargrove? A woman's voice, low and careful. This is Nadine Fowler. I manage operations at Castleton and Briggs. I worked with your wife for 19 years. I knew the name. Ruth had mentioned her. A practical woman, Ruth had said. Doesn't waste words. I'm sorry to call today of all days, Nadine said. I wouldn't if this could wait. There's something in Ruth's personal files here at the office. She left instructions, written instructions, sealed envelope, my name on the outside, that I was only to open them after she passed. I opened it this morning when I heard. A pause. Mr. Hargrove, she asked me to call you directly. She said not to go through your son, she said. And I'm reading her exact words here. She said, tell Everett to come alone. He may be in danger from inside his own house. My hand tightened on the phone. Behind me, I heard my son's voice, easy and low, talking to the funeral director about the reception timing. I'll be there at 4 o'clock, I said. I want to back up. Because none of what happened in the weeks that followed makes sense without understanding who Ruth was and who I thought my son had become. My name is Everett Hargrove. I'm 67 years old. I spent the better part of my adult life in Dalton County, Kentucky, first as a deputy, then as sheriff, for 3 consecutive terms. You learn things in that work. You learn that most people are better than their worst moment. But you also learn to recognize the ones who aren't. You learn to read the room before you walk into it. You learn the difference between someone who's grieving and someone who's performing grief. Ruth and I had been married 41 years. We met when she was 24 and I was 25, and she came in to file a report about a neighbor's dog that had gotten into her garden, and I was the deputy who took the report, and I made it last 45 minutes because I couldn't find a reason to stop writing. She figured out what I was doing about halfway through, and she let me do it anyway. That was Ruth. She was a financial analyst, spent most of her career at Castleton and Briggs, a wealth management firm in Lexington. She was good at it in the quiet, methodical way she was good at everything. Crossword puzzles, sourdough bread, growing tomatoes from seed, loving difficult people without losing herself in the process. Our son, Preston, was 43. He worked in commercial real estate, or had until about 18 months ago, when the market shifted and 2 deals he'd leveraged too heavily fell through simultaneously. He'd never been great with money. That sounds like a small thing to say about your own child, but it covers a lot of ground. It meant that when things were tight, he borrowed. It meant that when he borrowed, he expected it to be forgiven. It meant that over the years, Ruth had quietly, without telling me, covered gaps, a car payment here, a line of credit there, enough that I only found out the full scope of it later. His wife, Daphne, had grown up wealthy in a way that had convinced her money was simply a thing that existed around people like her. She was pleasant when pleasantness cost nothing. She was something else entirely when it did. I noticed things at the service, small things that a stranger wouldn't catch. Preston arrived 7 minutes after we'd asked everyone to be seated. He sits beside me and put his hand on my shoulder, but he didn't look at the casket. He looked at his phone, once, twice, sliding it just below the edge of the pew. Daphne sat with her ankles crossed and her program unopened in her lap, and when the pastor read the verse Ruth had chosen herself, the one from Ruth, the biblical Ruth, which had always amused my wife, Daphne leaned slightly toward Preston, and I watched her lips move. Preston gave the smallest nod. Whatever she said, it wasn't about scripture. Afterward, at the hall, people brought food and stories, and I received both in a fog that felt like being underwater. I watched Preston and Daphne from across the room. They stood together near the window, not talking to anyone, Daphne's hand on his forearm, her head tilted toward his ear. His jaw was set, not sad set, working set. Most of the guests had gone by 3 o'clock. Preston waited until the last car pulled out of the lot. Then he sat down across from me at one of the long folding tables, and he laced his fingers together on the tabletop the way I'd seen prosecutors do when they were about to make an offer. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the estate." I looked at him. At this face I had watched change from infancy, that I had held against my chest the night he ran a fever of 104 at age 6, and Ruth and I sat up taking turns with cool cloths until sunrise. This face, now with this expression, I was having trouble placing. Your mother isn't in the ground yet, I said. I know that, but there are time-sensitive things. The house, her accounts. She had a life insurance policy. We need to find the paperwork before it gets complicated. He paused. Daphne's uncle is an estate attorney. He can expedite things if we move quickly. Daphne appeared beside him then, from wherever she'd been, and sat down with the particular kind of ease that told me she'd been waiting for her cue. The thing is, Dad, the house is paid off, right? If you're going to be rattling around in it alone, it might actually be the right time to think about downsizing. The market in your area is strong. We could talk to Daphne's uncle about putting together I stood up. Slowly, because my left knee doesn't do anything quickly anymore, but I stood. We're not doing this today, I said. Preston looked up at me and something moved across his face. Quick, like a shadow. We're only trying to help you think ahead. You're not always going to be. Today, I said again, we are not doing this. I picked up my jacket from the chair. I had 4 hours before I needed to be at Castleton and Briggs. Nadine Fowler met me at the building's side entrance. She was a compact woman in her late 50s. Reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair, the look of someone who had been holding herself together through main force since morning. She shook my hand with both of hers and held it a moment longer than a handshake required. She was a good person, Nadine said, one of the best I've known. She led me to a conference room on the 4th floor. On the table there was a cardboard file box, a sealed manila envelope, and a smaller box, the kind you'd keep recipe cards in, made of pale blue painted wood with a small brass clasp. Nadine set a glass of water in front of me that I didn't touch. Ruth gave me the blue box 2 months ago, she said. She told me she'd been having symptoms, shortness of breath, some irregular heartbeat, and that the doctors were monitoring it. She said if anything happened to her, I should open the manila envelope first and follow the instructions inside. She slid the envelope toward me. It had already been opened, Ruth's handwriting on the front. Nadine, for after. Inside were 2 pages in Ruth's careful, small script. The top of the first page read, "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Don't let them tell you I didn't see it coming." I had to put the paper down. Nadine gave me a minute. She was good at giving people what they needed. I picked it back up. Ruth had written that in the past year, Preston had come to her 4 times asking for money. The last time for an amount that had made her refuse outright. She wrote that when she refused, he didn't get angry. He got quiet in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. She wrote that 3 weeks after that last conversation, she began to feel different. Not worse in the way a cardiac condition worsens gradually. Different, suddenly. Episodes that left her exhausted in a way sleep didn't fix. She'd mentioned it to her cardiologist, who adjusted her medication dosage and told her to monitor things. She wrote, "I found something in the guest bathroom cabinet that doesn't belong to me. Small amber bottle, no label. I didn't confront anyone. I poured it out and kept the bottle. It's in the blue box." She wrote, "I don't know what's in it. I hope I'm wrong. But I know my son, Everett. I know who he's become since he married her, and I know that the policy names you as primary beneficiary, but if you are deemed legally incapacitated at the time of settlement, everything goes into a restricted trust for 12 years. I set it up that way on purpose 2 years ago, after the 3rd time he asked me for money. I didn't tell you because you would have tried to talk me out of it, and because you would have confronted him, and that would have tipped our hand before we were ready." She wrote, "I hired someone. Her name is Lorraine Wick. She's a private investigator out of Lexington. She knows everything. Go see her. And Everett, don't go home tonight." I sat in that conference room for a long time after I finished reading. Nadine opened the blue box. Inside, 1 small amber bottle, empty, sealed in a Ziploc bag. 1 USB drive, a folded piece of paper with a name and phone number. And at the bottom, a photograph, printed on plain paper, slightly grainy, clearly taken from a distance, of Preston standing in the kitchen of our home at what looked like early morning, holding a bottle of something over a glass of orange juice. I recognized the kitchen. I recognized my son. I did not recognize the expression on his face. Lorraine Wick met me at a coffee shop on Limestone Street at 6 that evening. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s, with the alert stillness of someone who spent a lot of time listening. She ordered black coffee and set a folder on the table between us, before she even sat down. Your wife was thorough, she said. I want you to know that what I'm about to show you, she knew most of it before she died. She was preparing for it. She wasn't helpless. That helped, actually. More than Lorraine probably knew. She opened the folder. Preston had debts to 3 separate parties, 2 of them private lenders, that the kind of people you find when bank doors close. The combined total was substantial enough that I felt the air go out of the room when I saw the number. He'd been servicing the interest for 8 months and falling behind on the principal. The most aggressive creditor had apparently made the nature of his impatience clear. There were photographs. Preston in a parking garage with a man I didn't know. Heavyset. A certain kind of stillness about him that I recognized from years of dealing with people who were comfortable with consequences. Money changing hands in a way that was meant to be quick and wasn't quite quick enough. There were phone records. Lorraine had obtained them through means she was professionally vague about, showing a pattern of calls in the 3 weeks before Ruth's first bad episode. Preston's number. A number registered to a name Lorraine had traced to someone with a history in pharmaceutical diversion. There was a lab report. Lorraine had paid for an independent analysis of a substance, obtained, she said, from a source she'd rather not name in a coffee shop, but which matched the amber bottle from the blue box. It was a synthetic compound. Not difficult to obtain if you knew who to ask. In small amounts, undetectable in routine blood work. In repeated amounts, over weeks, for someone already managing a cardiac arrhythmia. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't have to. He wanted to look like he was helping, Lorraine said, moving in after she got sick, being the attentive son, while Daphne worked on you about the house. I thought about Daphne, the calmness of her, the way she'd sat at the hall after the funeral with her program unopened in her lap, whispering something to my son at exactly the moment the pastor read Ruth's chosen verse. I thought about the bottle over the orange juice. My hand moved toward my jacket pocket before I caught it. Old habit. The service weapon I'd carried for 3 decades wasn't there anymore. Hadn't been for 5 years. What do you need from me? I said. Lorraine had been waiting for that question. We need him to confess, she said. Not to us, to a recording. And we need to catch them doing something they can't explain. She paused. Are you willing to go home and pretend none of this happened? I thought about Ruth writing those pages at her office desk, sealing that envelope, trusting Nadine, building a case while she was sick, while she was frightened, while she was alone with it, because she didn't want me to know until the trap was ready. My wife, who had never once in 41 years asked me to handle anything for her, had spent her last months handling this so I wouldn't have to carry it until it was already done. Yes, I said. The drive home was the longest I'd made in years. The porch light was on. Preston's truck was in the driveway. I sat in my car for a moment, and I did what I used to do before a difficult situation. I let my body go quiet before my mind had to perform. The door was unlocked. I hadn't locked it when I left. Ruth always locked the door. Inside, the living room rearranged slightly, a stack of file folders on the dining table that hadn't been there this morning, and from the kitchen, the sound of Daphne moving around with a comfort that said she'd been there long enough to stop feeling like a guest. Preston was on the couch with his laptop, and he looked up when I came in with the expression of someone who'd been rehearsing concern. Dad, we were worried. You were gone a long time. I needed air, I said. Drove around. Did you eat anything? No. Daphne appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had an apron on. I had never seen Daphne wear an apron in my life. I made soup, she said. Sit down. You need to eat something. I sat at the kitchen table. I watched her move to the stove. The window above the sink was dark, and in the reflection I could see the kitchen behind me without turning my head. 32 years of learning to watch rooms without appearing to watch rooms. Daphne ladled soup into a bowl. She carried it to the counter near the window and set it down, and then she reached into the front pocket of the apron. A gesture she probably thought was casual, and her hand came out with something small. A folded paper square. She checked the reflection. She saw what she thought she saw. An old man slumped at his kitchen table, staring at the wall. She unfolded the paper over the bowl, tipped it slightly, stirred once. She brought the bowl to the table with a warm smile. Chicken noodle, she said. Eat while it's hot. I looked at the bowl. I looked at her hands. I picked up the spoon. I said, you know, I had a dog growing up. Lab mix. Name was Biscuit. Used to sit right under this table when Ruth was cooking. Daphne said, that's sweet. Smartest dog I ever had, I said. Would eat anything. I let my hand shake, which isn't entirely performing at my age, and the spoon rattled against the edge of the bowl, and then my elbow caught it, and the bowl went over the table's edge and hit the floor and shattered, soup spreading across the tile in a wide brown stain. Daphne made a sharp sound. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry, I don't know what." "It's fine," she said, but her voice had gone tight. "It's... Just sit, I'll get it." She was cleaning the floor when my neighbor's cat, I'd been feeding it since he'd gone to his daughter's for the week, came through the kitchen door flap and made straight for the soup on the tile. Before either of us could move, it had lapped up a portion and retreated back through the door. We both watched it go. Daphne stood up slowly. Her face had drained of color. "Old cats are tough," I said. "Vet always said so." She didn't answer. 15 minutes later, I heard the cat yowling from the backyard. It recovered by morning, but for those 15 minutes, there was a silence in that kitchen that said everything that neither of us said out loud. Preston was in front of me with his hands on the table. "The financial people are going to need documentation soon," he said. His voice was even, but his eyes were doing something he couldn't control. "The house, the accounts. You're not equipped to manage all of that alone. We want to help. But we need access to her files, and we need you to give us power of attorney so we can start working with the estate properly." "Your mother handled everything," I said. "I wouldn't even know where to look. That's why we're here." He reached across and put his hand on mine. "We're family, Dad. That's what family does." I stayed in Ruth's chair that night with my old Ruger under the arm of it, and the phone Lorraine had given me set to record. I didn't sleep more than an hour at a stretch. I heard Preston in the hallway twice, stopping outside my door. Both times he walked away. The following morning, a man arrived at the house at 9 o'clock. He wore a good suit and carried an initialed briefcase and introduced himself as Daphne's uncle, the estate attorney. He set papers on the coffee table with the practiced efficiency of someone who arranged these things regularly and handed me a pen. "This is just preliminary," he said. "Standard authorization to begin the review process." Preston sat beside me on the couch. Daphne sat across from us, legs crossed, watching the papers. "Can I read them first?" I said. "Of course." He smiled. "Take your time." I read slowly enough that Preston shifted twice beside me. The papers were for full power of attorney, not just estate review. Everything. Medical decisions, financial decisions, property transfer authority. I set the pen down. "I'd like to have my own attorney look at these first," I said. The smile on the attorney's face didn't move, but something behind it did. "That's certainly your right. Is there a specific concern?" "No concern," I said. "I'm just old-fashioned. Like to have a second set of eyes." Preston exhaled through his nose. "Dad, this is really straightforward. You're making it more complicated than—" "I know what I'm doing," I said quietly. "I was doing things like this before you were born." There was a silence. Then the attorney began gathering his papers. Preston waited until the man was in his car. Then he turned to me and his voice was low and very flat, a register I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager, and I'd caught him in a lie. "You're not as sharp as you think you are," he said. "Mom covered for you more than you know. You've had memory issues for 2 years, whether you want to admit it or not. If I have to petition for guardianship to protect your assets, I will." I looked at my son. "Okay," I said. That night, the 4th night since the funeral, I moved this chest away from the corner of the bedroom and lifted the floor panel underneath it. Ruth had shown me the space when we bought the house, 28 years ago. "Emergency," she'd said. "Don't use it unless—" There was a flashlight, a small fireproof box with documents, and the backup phone I'd put there myself 6 years ago, still charged because I'd kept the habit. I sent Lorraine a message through the app we'd agreed on. 3 words. "Thursday. He's moving." Her reply came within 10 minutes. "Bring him to the edge. We'll do the rest. Hold your position." Thursday was 2 days away. I want to tell you what those 2 days were like, but I don't have the right words for it. I've done difficult things in my professional life. I've delivered notifications. I've sat across tables from people who had done terrible things and listened to them explain themselves. I once spent 36 hours straight on a kidnapping case that ended the right way and left me unable to sleep properly for a month. None of those prepared me for sitting at my own breakfast table, in my own house, eating eggs that Daphne cooked while she asked me questions about my medication schedule in a voice made of cotton. I answered the questions. I let my eyes go soft when she looked at me. I let Preston guide me by the arm when we walked from one room to another, as if my legs had forgotten what they were for. I smiled at the right moments. I forgot the right things. I thanked them for being there. It was the most sustained performance of my life, and every hour of it, I thought about Ruth writing those pages at her desk, alone, knowing what she knew, still doing the things she'd decided needed to be done. Thursday morning, Preston sat down across from me at the breakfast table with a different kind of document. Not from the attorney this time. Something he'd printed himself, a property listing, our house, with a price and a contact number at the bottom. I met with an agent, he said, just to get a sense of value. The thing is, Dad, the upkeep on a place this size, it's not practical for one person. We found a really nice assisted living community, 40 minutes from us. Good reviews. You'd have everything you need and we could. Son, I said. He stopped. I need to ask you something. He waited. Did you take something from your mother? From her medicine cabinet, last spring. The color change in his face was almost imperceptible, almost. What? No. Why would I? What are you talking about? There was a bottle, I said. Small bottle, no label. It went missing. Dad, I don't know what you're. I think you do. He stood up. His chair scraped back. You're confused. This is exactly what I've been talking about. You're mixing things up. You're not. I'm not confused, I said. I've never been confused, Preston. Not once in my life. He stared at me, and in the space of a breath, the performance ended for both of us. He wasn't the concerned son anymore. I wasn't the bewildered old man. We were just two people in a kitchen who both knew what had happened in this house. His voice dropped to something quiet and hollow. She was going to give it all away. You know that, right? She told me. Said she was changing the beneficiaries. Said she was going to give it to foundations, to organizations, and let me drown. His jaw worked. I asked her 4 times. 4 times. And every time she looked at me like I was something she was disappointed in, like I was a mistake. She was trying to save you, I said. You couldn't see it because she wouldn't help me. His voice cracked. I had people calling me. Showing up, I didn't have a choice. You had a choice, I said. You made it. She didn't even. He stopped. Started again. I didn't mean for it to happen that fast. I thought she'd get sick enough that she'd listen, that she'd finally just. He stopped again. The old phone sat in my shirt pocket. Its application had been running for 4 minutes. At the front of the house, I heard a car door. Then another. Then footsteps on the porch, measured and deliberate, and then the doorbell, and then a voice identifying itself in the way I had identified myself for 32 years. And Preston's face when he heard it was a thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because it was the face of a stranger, but because underneath the shock and the anger and the fear, there was something else. Something that almost looked like relief. I stood at the kitchen window while they did what they came to do. Daphne had been stopped on her way out to her car with a bag she'd packed that morning. Preston didn't fight it. He sat on the floor where they put him, and he looked at the tile, and he didn't say my name. The lab analysis came back 10 days later. The compound matched. The medical examiner's office reopened Ruth's case that same afternoon. The district attorney charged my son with second-degree murder and charged Daphne as a co-conspirator. The judge denied bond at the initial hearing. Lorraine told me afterward that the judge's exact words, off record, were that she'd not seen a more deliberately documented case in 20 years on the bench. A week after the charges were filed, the estate attorney with the initial briefcase quietly withdrew from practice, pending a bar investigation. I sold the big house, not because Preston wanted me to, because Ruth had been right that it was too much for one person, and because every room in it held a memory that was too bright to live inside yet. I bought a smaller place on 2 acres outside of town, a vegetable garden in the back. Ruth would have known what to do with it immediately. I'm learning. The life insurance claim was processed 6 weeks after the criminal charges were filed. The amount was significant enough that I sat with it for a long time before I decided what to do. Nadine came to see me in October on a Saturday morning, and we sat on the new back porch and I showed her what I'd drafted. A foundation, named for Ruth, dedicated to providing legal assistance to elderly individuals facing financial exploitation or abuse by family members. The kind of quiet, grinding betrayal that doesn't make the news because the victims are often too ashamed to report it or too isolated to know where to turn. Nadine read through the documents the way Ruth would have, carefully, without comment, then precisely and completely. She'd have hated having her name on it, Nadine said. I know, I said. I'm doing it anyway. 4 months later, I received a letter at the new address. I don't know how he found it, though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Preston's handwriting on the envelope, which I recognized from every birthday card and note he'd ever signed. I opened it at the kitchen table with my morning coffee. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he'd been under more pressure than I knew, that Daphne had pushed him further than he would have gone on his own, that he wasn't really the person who had done what he'd done. And he needed help, he needed an attorney, I read it twice, the whole letter, which ran to 3 pages. He mentioned his mother once. In the 3rd paragraph, he referred to her as the situation. I folded the letter back along its creases. I wrote him a check for $50 for commissary expenses and enclosed a single index card on which I'd written 6 words. She knew you. She loved you anyway. I mailed it on a Tuesday morning. Then I drove out to the property Ruth had always wanted to see, a nature preserve about an hour east, the kind of place where the light comes through the trees at a certain angle in late afternoon and turns everything amber and still. She'd had a brochure of it on her nightstand for years. I'd always said we'd go one day, when things settled. I sat on a bench at the edge of a small pond, and I stayed there for a long time without thinking about anything in particular. Just the sound of the water and the birds and the ordinary business of a world that keeps going. Ruth's portion of the foundation's first-year budget went to 11 families across 4 states. 3 cases resulted in criminal charges. 8 resulted in civil remedies that kept people in their homes. She'd saved all that money in the background of our life together. One careful decision at a time, while I was busy thinking I was the one keeping us safe. She'd been the one keeping us safe. She'd been the one all along.